Back, friends, to another edition of In Other News. Sorry, I've been a summertime slacker. I haven't posted up anything for a few weeks. And that's not because of lack of interesting news to talk about. In fact, I'm just going to encapsulate a whole bunch of different cool-ass stories that have happened in the last few weeks that really have me excited. And I'm actually shocked. Well, no, not really. I'm going to pretend that I'm shocked that the Obama administration is not claiming more credit, and due credit, by the way, for perhaps one of the best examples of a foreign policy success they've had for his administration. I'm talking about Southeast Asia. I know I've been beating the Southeast Asian drum here for like a few months, but it's just a really happening region on planet Earth, and it is the place, I'm telling you, I heard it here first, it is the place that the American administration of Barack Obama can claim actual, real, tangible success in bettering ties, in bettering their involvement, and in changing the balance of power players in the region. Who am I talking about? What's going on? Well, there's been a whole bunch of activity around Asia in general, of course, but Southeast Asia in particular. A flurry of activity in the last 6 months. We've talked about Aung San Suu Kyi in Burma, that she got elected, and she actually attended her first session of Parliament, legit, after she did a global tour. So that's going on in Burma. We have the Southeast, the ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which has met actually a couple times, and they just had a big meeting last week and a half ago. It's July 17th right this second. And in particular with the United States, the U.S. has been all up in the Southeast Asian Hizzle. We've had Leon Panetta, the Secretary of Defense, that has visited virtually all the Southeast Asian nations. I know he did a tour in Singapore and then bumped over to Vietnam. The first Department of Defense got to go to Vietnam since the U.S.-Vietnam War. Then we had U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton just went there last week as well, who attended the Association of Southeast Asian Nations that was in Cambodia, and then she bumped over to Vietnam herself and other places. And you're like, what's going on here, and why am I so excited about it? Well, the reason it's a big deal is because, of course, and I'm just going to call a spade because you know that's what I do, all this U.S. involvement and kind of the shift that the U.S. is undertaking at a global scale from the Atlantic to the Pacific, let's just call a spade. We all know it. It's to kind of counter the growing influence of China. And in fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and call it the new Chinese Containment Policy. We had the same thing back in the Cold War. We called it the Soviet Containment Policy. That was to make as many friends as we could in Western Europe and unify under umbrella of NATO and to make other friends around the Soviet Union to kind of contain them. Containment policy. Go Google it. I'm not making it up. I think what you're seeing unfold very rapidly in today's world is a Chinese containment policy. And I kind of think it's working a little bit. And even if you don't like the terms and you don't like the idea of the U.S. sticking its nose in other places, for the first time that I can remember in my lifetime, this containment policy is going part and parcel, hand in hand with the countries themselves wanting U.S. influence in their countries to help contain China. And I'm thinking, again, specifically of Southeast Asian nations. Now, places like Singapore to a lesser extent, but Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, all of these entities are very quickly becoming very strong U.S. allies. The Philippines has always been a U.S. ally since we controlled the country 100 years ago. Indonesia has been a U.S. ally for decades. Vietnam, a place we tried to bomb into oblivion 40 years ago, is wildly, quickly becoming a staunch U.S. ally, inviting the United States in to perhaps set up naval bases, to perhaps have more economic interchange. And the relationship with the U.S. and Vietnam has actually been increasing economically just for the last few years. This is all new, friends. It's very new. And just in the last handful of years, we've had basically no relations with Vietnam, economically or otherwise, to full-fledged buddies, economic explosion, and now military-political alliance that's forming up. Why is this all forming up? Again, because China is claiming all of the South China Sea, and this is an issue we've talked about in lots of other podcasts and in class. The South China Sea issue remains kind of the centerpiece, the most prominent possible flashpoint in Asia where countries might go to war. This area that the South China Sea, which China, for its part, claims all of it, And it's hard to see how they do it through international law or any even historical basis, but they've been doing it. They've been sending in warships and battleships, and as soon as they have more aircraft carriers, they'll be sending those in to patrol around, to try to force out, to have a physical presence, to try to intimidate and push other entities out who are also claiming the South China Sea. Places like Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia. See how this is rolling? And for their part, the ASEAN group, which had a meeting last week, again, that's why I'm excited about Southeast Asia. This was going to be kind of, hey, this is the big thing we need to talk about. Because Chinese ships are bumping into Vietnamese ships and bumping into Filipino ships. And this, no one wants a big war here. So how could we, ASEAN, the bloc, the Southeast Asian bloc, should we have a policy and go ahead and put forward a statement to say, hey, China, here's what we as a group are doing, so either back off or get on board. They failed to do that. Even with Leon Panetta having visited there a month ago and basically saying, hey, we got your back. We're going to start moving in U.S. troops and U.S. ports, and we'll have a U.S. naval presence here, which is increasing, not just in the South China Sea, but in the Pacific in general. Leon Panetta has pretty much already put that in place. We're already moving 60% or increasing our naval forces to 60% in the Pacific arena. And that's another podcast I know you've already watched. And then you had Secretary of State Hillary Clinton over there going basically, yes, we want to establish stronger ties with you, Vietnam, a country we tried to bomb into oblivion. And went over to the Philippines. Yes, Philippines, you and the Americans, we've always been allies. And yes, we don't have a military presence in the Philippines right now. Maybe we should get that back. And I believe the Philippines are saying, yes, we should. You guys should probably move back in. So despite overt, that is open moves by the United States to re-inject and reinforce the U.S. presence, not just in the South China Sea, but the Pacific in general, despite overt overtones to, yes, we will come here and help you out, the ASEAN bloc still could not agree to a single principle of how to deal with China and the South China Sea issue. And really, it was Cambodia, maybe a couple other countries. I know Cambodia was mentioned the most. Cambodia was kind of the sticking point. They're the country that hosted the ASEAN meeting, and they were essentially saying, yeah, we don't think we should have a policy yet. We shouldn't have a unified thing yet. And that was under Chinese, influence. There's still a kind of a strong tie between China and Cambodia, and so I guess the Chinese were really squeezing the Cambodian nuts to make sure that they did not come out with a single unified statement from the whole ASEAN bloc, that 13 state bloc that encompasses all of Southeast Asia and really is all around the South China Sea. So Cambodia intentionally hedged their bets and did not allow a single principle or statement to go through, which really infuriated Vietnam and other entities which are saying, come on, dudes, we got to unify, or China's just going to roll over and take over everything. Again, this is why I'm excited about it. I'm not making fun of the Chinese, by the way. I'm just saying, this is real politic in action, man. You're seeing how these different nation states and just political states are working together to try to figure out how to counter the rise of China, but without going to war. And you see how the United States is not intervening, but becoming more and more of a player over here because it's in our best interest to also make sure that China doesn't roll over a lot of our allies in the region. And it's not just the Southeast Asian states, by the way. Again, this is all just in the last couple weeks. The flurry and fury over an island dispute between China and Japan has cropped back up again. Both countries claim this little Senkaku island that's a little dink island just north of Taiwan, and that's an issue that's gotten very hot in the past when Chinese ships have bumped into Japanese ships. And so you have an issue going on up there. You also have island disputes between North Korea and South Korea. Obviously, South Korea is on Team West, and North Korea is on Team Crazy, but supported by China. So you have island disputes up there, and this is all in the water. Islands in the water. So you have an island dispute up there that's kind of pitting China against the West. This Japan-China dispute over Senkaku, which is pitting China against the West. The whole South China Sea issue now is increasingly pitting China against the West, allied with Southeast Asian countries. Ha! But it's just not about conflict, although it's one of the things that's keeping this whole issue very much alive and moving forward at a very brisk pace. And by the way, what I mean by this is, 5 years ago, there was no talk of the U.S. reestablishing military bases in the Philippines. No one was talking about that. No one was talking about, hey, we should really start up a deep water port in Vietnam. Nobody was talking about this. Is all a product of very recent times because of the semi-aggression of China. And I say semi-aggression, they're being very much more forward in saying, this is China saying, we claim all of this and we're having this and stop talking about it because it's ours. It's hard to describe that as anything but a very aggressive foreign policy. And so these countries are, I say, rightfully worried about that aggressive Chinese foreign policy, and that's why they're siding up with Team West. But it's not all just about the South China Sea and about island disputes and China versus the West or even Chinese containment. The United States has been very busy doing other stuff too, and then we finish up with this. Not only, whenever the United States goes into, say, build a deep water port, I don't mean build it, but establish a deep water Navy port in Vietnam, or military bases in the Philippines. Or, as you already know, if you've watched former podcast on this, new bases in northern Australia, possibly a reestablishment of port facilities in New Zealand. The Pacific, it's hot. When all of these things happen, economic policy kind of goes part and parcel with these things. Of course, there's going to be an economic infusion with the movement of troops or just the visitation of Navy ships. But the U.S. typically, as all countries do, will also be establishing economic ties at the same time, particularly in Vietnam, I've already pointed out. We're trading like gangbusters with this country, an entity we had no trade relations with a decade ago. So big infusion of economic ties in virtually all of these countries, especially Vietnam. And now we finish up back over in Burma, where I started with Aung San Suu Kyi, Most Honorable Suu Kyi, the lady. Not only did she attend her first session of the real parliament in Burma as a duly elected official, that country is just changing explosionary fast. I'm not going to go into the whole story because you probably know it already, but this place, which we, just a few months ago even, I was saying, I don't know. It looks like they're turning into a democracy. Aung San Suu Kyi has been freed. She's been elected. She was allowed to leave the country. She went on a European tour. And then a lot of European countries started to open up investment. Virtually all of Team West has had an economic embargo against Burma since they've had a brutal dictatorship in charge for 50 years. And slowly that started to trickle through, but a lot of us still weren't sure, is it going to take? Is this really going to hold? Or is the military going to take back over in Burma? I'm going to go ahead and throw in the towel on this one. I think it's done. Now everybody is investing in Burma like gangbusters, including the United States. The United States just last week said, yep, embargo off. We think Burma has changed enough. We are confident in investing millions, if not billions, in allowing U.S. companies to get in there and make sure this democracy also turns into a democracy capitalist system. And it is going forward at a breakneck speed that is, quite frankly, totally unpredictable and amazing. I believe General Electric is the first U.S. company. We're talking like 40 years of an embargo. No U.S. companies have been in Burma. And General Electric is the first one that's charging in, General Electric charging, get it, to establish, I don't know if they're going to put up some storefronts or some factories or take advantage of the cheap labor. I don't know, but GE said we're all in, and the U.S. government gave them the green light. So all sorts of exciting things happening in Southeast Asia. Virtually all the top diplomats of the United States Obama administration have visited virtually all countries in Southeast Asia. ASEAN had their huge meeting, although they did not figure out a South China Sea policy that they could unify around. All of them are agreeing that something should be done about aggressive China. The United States is moving in a very big way, militarily, politically, and economically, to virtually all of these states. It's exciting times in Southeast Asia, particularly for the United States. And that's why I'll end where I started. I'm really shocked the U.S. Obama administration is not touting this kind of big success story more than they are. And maybe it's because most Americans have no clue where Southeast Asia is on a map. Most of them have only ever heard of Vietnam in Rambo movies that they've watched. So we have an intellectual disconnect that I guess there's no sense bragging about something that most Americans won't even understand. But that's what I'm here to change. And hopefully you will tell all your friends and relatives and neighbors and start talking about what's going on in the wider world, particularly the United States in Southeast Asia. But for now, party on.